video to show you. It doesn't really matter, but you might appreciate it. The spiritual thought is, I abandoned you last week. Sorry for abandoning you and not being here. I apologize for that. I was sick of that. Sick. I missed Dad. You guys were all just doing things or being productive. Anyway, so I went here. This right here was, this is my dormitory. That's my hotel room we stayed in. This is out in an 1890 constructed mill for grinding ore. And these rafters, guess what they're made out of? They've got to be. Because it was all harvested nearby. Bristlecone pine. That's bristlecone pine rafters. I swear they are. I'm trying to look at the tree rings on. They're tight. I think it's bristlecone pine. And that's my bedroom right there. And here's all the mouse droppings. I had to sweep that away just to make myself some space to throw my mattress down. It was a great night. And here they are. That's the majestic one.
What were they mining for over there?
I think they're looking for silver. Silver and gold. Whatever they can find. Whatever kind of ore they can pull out their after. They would drill these little pilot holes, and then these were on ridiculous slopes. They're like blowing out these holes trying to find what's in them. And they must have not done anything because they just kind of give them a walk away. And they put these big logs like at an angle trying to keep them propped open. And I thought, he's going to die in that. Like they were doing it. Even now, they probably would have been rough. These people were looking hard for stuff. And I don't know how they even survived any of that. And this is growing right nearby it. So I gave this was my testimony in church on Sunday. And I thought we should just briefly just say this. Because you are all foresters in your heart. You know who you are. This right here is Pinus longeva. Did we talk about that yet in this class? I should have brought some footage. I can pull it up. At the end of class, if you've got some time, I'll pull it up. So I got drones. We got drone footage of bristlecone and a half. I haven't shown you that. Shame on me. Let's do it after we talk about some other stuff. We'll come to that. Don't let me forget. Anyway, that tree right there, Pinus longeva. This tree right here is probably about 3,000 years old. And the other trees we got, so I cord one, I think is probably closer to 4,000 years old. And the crazy thing is, here's this slope right there is about a 65% slope. And they are facing south. This is as hard as you can get. This rock is like gravelly rock. There's some soil in it. It's constantly moving. It's at 10,500 feet elevation. There's nothing that makes it for good conditions there. And that has been sitting there before Jesus was born. For thousands of years it's been sitting there. So I told the congregation, I said, sometimes your trial, your hardships of where you live and how you live and the things it throws at you, depends on how you handle it, it can make you mighty in the long run. And the crazy thing is the worse the slope and the worse the conditions got, the larger and bigger the trees got, and the older the trees got. Why is that? That's part of David's dissertation.
It's like that song by Johnny Cash about Boy Named Sue.
Yeah.
Yeah, he had a hard time at a young age, so you grew up to be strong.
Yeah, that's right. He had the same kind of thing going on. But it turns out a place like this, it's harsh. So the rings, like I say, the rings are tight. They're really, they're tight rings. So that much growth in the tree is over 100 years of growth. And so they just hardly grow. But if they get into competition, if there's fires and possible disturbance, they're not going to make it. They got to start over again. But these guys were completely isolated. Some of these were growing, I'm not kidding, just right out of bare rock.
Wait, where was
It's a cliff. I'll show you. It's a jet. It's a rocky slope, totally exposed, and here are these trees growing right out of them, like amazing. But they're that way because they are adapted to those conditions and they persist in survival.
So that may be part of why they've been able to survive, is like there's not tons of other vegetation around them that like carry fire or other disasters.
That is 100% my thought about one of the reasons for it. When you think about growth rates and water use efficiency, things that allow species to persist over time, and what caused them not to persist. And if I were to show you, and I meant to show this when we go back and talk ecology, if I were to diagram out this triangle that was developed by Noble and Slater first, but then Grimes in 1977. We got to talk Grimes at some point. drawings proposed a triangle, and in that triangle at top is C for competitive. Bottom left triangle is S, stress tolerance. Lower bottom right is what remains. Competitive, stress tolerant. What have I not covered? This is I'm not trying to teach you, I'm just trying to give you a think a little bit. What would be another category that plants can fit in as far as their strategies for survival? Persistence. Any thoughts? R. It's an R. It has something to do with that. That's on the word that's linked into it. What's R? RU. It's ruderal. And ruderal means what? So plants like cheatgrass, their strategy is not really competitive, right? They're not competing directly. Are they tolerators or avoiders? Cheatgrass. Are they environmental tolerators or avoiders? This is like this could be the most important thing I think about all day right now. Is cheatgrass a tolerator or avoider? Tolerator? So when conditions get tough, starts to dry out, it tolerates. Does it? Cheatgrass.
It just dies.
It's dead. Is it tolerating or avoiding? It's a total avoider. Cheatgrass is an avoider. As soon as it starts to get at all hard out there, it dies. But its strategy, why is it so successful then? You can't tolerate anything, then why is it so successful? So what? Yeah, produce a ton of seed. Produce a ton of seed. And that seed, how viable, how successful is that seed? It's freaking great. It does really well. And it's ready for spring to come up, and bam, it's going for it. That is high successful. And phenotypic plasticity. What does phenotypic plasticity mean? What is that? Oh, that might be the most important word we use for the day.
Ability to change your characteristics.
Ability to fluctuate given whatever conditions are thrown your way. So if you are in a drought period, does cheatgrass just die in the spring? There's not a lot of soil moisture to begin with. It was just never really there. What does it do? It puts out these shallow roots. It's still an annual, right? Cheatgrass is an annual plant. It's got these little roots coming out. And then you've got, in a drought condition, little tiny leaves. And then this one little, and it still produces a seed. No matter what, it's going to kick seed out. It's not very much. But then you get a wet year. You've been in cheatgrass stand in a wet year. It can be up to here. It can be up to your thighs. And it's this tall, and it's producing hundreds of seed per plant. It's got all these leaves. You'd think it's a perennial grass. You're like, what is that? That's blue bunch. No, it's not. It's freaking cheatgrass, and it's huge. And it's still an annual. That's phenotypic plasticity. It handles whatever it has if they're good enough. And then it dies off. It avoids stress. It avoids drought, really. If it gets too dry, it dies off. We'll go back to the next year. Those are ruderal characteristics. So you got competitive plants that compete, right? What are some competitive plants that are successful competitors? What competes well? My PhD was all entirely on a competitive plant, which is juniper, western juniper, total competitive plant. It just gets in there, it fights with everything else. Stuff is dying off around it. It occupies a site. Pretty soon you have a phase 3 woodland. It's all juniper. That is competition. Turns out, though, that juniper is a stress tolerant. Is it a stress tolerant plant? The S. Totally stress tolerant. If the water levels drop down, it just persists. It can handle with real high water use efficiency. It persists. Is it ruderal? Like invaders, invasive species characteristics? To some extent, it kind of behaves that way too. So if you look at this triangle, here's my drawing. Here's the triangle. It's kind of here in the middle. if you're like going to characterize individual plants, you kind of find them all sort of in the middle of having the ability to deal with all of them. This right there, that is not a seed plant. This thing right here does not do well in the seed world. It doesn't compete. If you get down to where soils are deeper, you get out of limestone-based soils, this thing starts to just drop off. You get below 8,000 feet, 7,000 foot, anything below that, it's just, you can hardly find it. But you give it some stress, give it a harsh condition to live in, it does great. Is it ruderal? Not at all. Not at all. We're actually worried that if you start to change climates, this is part of Birchfield's PhD, is if you start changing climates too fast, when this thing is taking, it took millions of years to get to where it's at. And it actually used to be down the lower Great Basin. If you go out and look at pack rat middens, you can look at the midden debris in 40,000-year-old middens. You know what a pack rat midden is? Do all of you know what that is? Is there anybody who does not know what a pack rat midden is? Just tell me outright. Okay, perfect. Perfect. I'll show you in a second. Unless I totally forget, which is likely to happen.
What was rural again?
Rural is, I'll just go pull it up and show you, but the traits that invasive plants have: rapid growth and reproduction, but you're going to die off quickly. Often are avoiders versus tolerators species. They are most successful in post-disturbance, early seral successional characteristics. They get in, they establish, but they can easily compete it out if other things are able to get in with them. Rural. Pack rat midden looks like this. Let me show you a picture of this. Pack rat midden. Here's this tree. There's that tree right there. It's probably a 30,000-year-old tree. Most of it's dead. Some of it's still alive. Stress tolerators. That's the view of cord those. I'm not portrait this pack rat midden. There's a beauty. Oh, there's some nice. There's a bushy-tailed wood rat. Dang, that's really Parameskius. Bushy-tailed wood rats are usually, and desert wood rats are the culprits. This right here, if you go out to southern Utah or West Desert, go anywhere in West Desert and start crawling around the cliff faces, you'll see these. And there'll be like a little crack in the rocks, and you'll find this nice tar-like substance. And the early explorers that came out here to the west, they hiked around these mountains and they said, that has got, there's a journal written about this. This guy was writing this report. He said, I found what were obviously a food source, a food stash for Native Americans who put this. We think it's a candy-like substance. And so we broke it off and ate it. And it had this sweet but really bitter, nasty flavor to it. We tried to consume it, and we just got to the point where we just couldn't consume it anymore. But they thought the Native Americans had bad taste for candy. Well, it turned out that's not candy. This is materials that are used for building nests by these pack rats. Scientific name? We forget, don't we? We all have that knowledge and we forgot. We should be ashamed and go look it up. And so this thing stores the materials in these cracks like this. And then if you're a pack rat, you don't think about walking outside your cave to go defecate or urinate. You just do it on your mound. Well, if you're going to do this and you're going to urinate on your mound, well, that stuff works its way down to the materials and debris, and then it stays there and starts to sort of solidify over time. But it's not just you. You do this, and then your kids are doing that. Pretty soon your grandkids are doing the same thing. They're bringing some material, but then they're urinating all over it. And over the next 40,000 years of great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchild is now living there, and you've got this stuff that's built up. So it looks like this. Here's the actual midden stuff, but it's this black stuff. 40 to 60,000 years is what they're predicting. And you actually know how old it is by carbonating it. But you carbonate a chunk. It's like doing geology, but in more of our time scales of natural resources, ecology. And you chunk out a piece of this stuff, carbonate it, and then you look what's in it, and there are remains of pollen and plant materials, and you go look at those things, you're like, that is bristlecone pine. And down the valley bottoms 10,000 years ago, where the pack-rat middens were at, bristlecone pine down the bottom. And now they're up to 10,000 feet. So what happens to our environment as we go through this global shift in climates is remarkable. And if you want to come look at it, I've got 4 or 5 buckets in my closet. Come to my lab, and as soon as you walk in the door, open the closet door. It kind of stinks in there. I really should get rid of them because it smells bad. But there's 3 or 4 of these little plastic containers of Native American candy. Come and have some. Try it and see if you agree with these people what that tastes like. But we think, man, one time I want to take those things and go have them dated and see what's in them. I think you'd learn a lot about the place where you're at by looking at that stuff. It's so remarkable. The spiritual thought, which I started 18 minutes ago, it's not about this. It's about you stay firm, right? It's about being founded on things that matter in life to you the most. Stay grounded in that stuff, and you'll be able to persist. You'll live a long, happy life with knowing that trials are not your enemy. They build your foundation.
So I just going back to one point. How does the inside of the tree, if it's like 4,000 years old, how does that not start to rot or deteriorate? That much time, or do they?
Dang it. Sure. So the answer to this is that's exactly what happens. 3/4, 4/5 of the trees I cored, these are trees, they're gone, that you and I and a couple others would have to go hand in hand to get around. They're massive things. They're huge. And most of those, I started coring. You know what a tree core is? I'm sorry I didn't bring one to class, or I should have brought it down here. Core into it. No, you don't do this. You're like, you start turning that core, and you get in that far, also your core goes just spinning because you hit rot. And most of it that way. Big old trees like that, they do get rotted. But this last trip out, you won't believe it, I had a 32-inch tree core, and I got a solid piece of wood that was 30 inches. And the rings are so tight, I think I probably have 3,000 years of rings. I don't know yet, we're going to find out. At least 2,000 years of rings on this one core. So cool, but most of the time that's not the case. And that's what happened to the one guy who cored Methuselah. You know Methuselah? That was the one out. It was actually in Great Basin National Park. The guy cored it, he hit rot. He hit rot. He was jamming up his core. He's like, we want to know how all these trees are out here. And so I think he called up and got clearance from the Forest Service. He was a University of Utah student, but also worked with the Forest Service from the Carolinas. I got to go back and remind myself of the details of his life. I feel bad for him bringing this up. Poor guy does not want me talking about this today. But here we go. The guy got permission, and he went and got a chainsaw, and he cut it down. He started counting these rings, and dealt with the rot, kind of figured out what he was looking at, and he hit 5,000. He hit 5,085 or something like that rings. At that point, that was the oldest tree on Earth that we were aware of. Turned out we think we found one in the White Mountains of California. You go to Bishop and head up in the White Mountains. There's some trees over there. You ever seen the Patriarch? You know the Patriarch? Oh, it'd take you so much time. I don't know if you even care. If you don't care, just stop me doing this. I'm on a roll. I really should stop. Find this long J, and this is called Patriarch. Patriarch is one of those. Where are you, Patriarch? It's the biggest. I think it's the largest base. These are all. This is the White Mountains. They're just this really light colored soil. These trees are just ancient things on there. I don't know why they're not just Patriarchs. Anyways, this big. The tree itself. It would start here at one side of it, and it would end probably about here. That's the DVH of this bristlecone pine. It's insane. It's just totally insane.
How tall is it?
Like 18 feet tall. Okay, fine, it's 22, but not. It's just not tall at all. It's so short. Okay. So anyway, Levi, that's the case. They do get rot. It gets really hard to age them. That's why that guy did that. And he actually turned out to be a really good forester. Did a lot of great work. His reputation is that he cut the seed down there. And that's why I feel ashamed for perpetuating gossip. But he did.
So why did he cut it down?
Just to confirm how old it was. You want to know for sure how old it
Well,
was.
you have permission.
But he got clearance, but he probably shouldn't have been asking for clearance. And he kind of, I don't know, I wasn't there. Come on, let me cut it down. No, you can't, come on. Okay, fine. He could have been like that, or been like, I don't know how it
Probably
goes.
called up and was like, yo, I want to cut down a tree to age it, and they're like, cool beans.
Yeah.
Give us $20 for a permit.
And this was in the 60s, right? We had a different attitude in the 60s about everything. So we give a lot of people a lot of leeway. When you go pre-70s, I give people a lot of leeway for decisions. Because we have a different attitude today than we did then. All right, this is drone stuff. You guys all love drones. You're doing some classification. I know you did it on Thursday. You want to see this thing? Let me become drone nerd someday.
There should be a drone there.
What do you decide I just wasted 4 minutes of your life? What, and there's anything you can add us before we go there, say your piece.
I just had a question about the legality of what you just did.
Yeah.
Because for professional, like, once you publish a video, isn't that considered professional use? He obviously wasn't using visual line of sight during his flight activity.
Ooh, I like
So, like,
this.
how does it not get pulled off the internet and he get prosecuted for it? I'm just curious.
Ooh,
Like,
Especially if he's long past it.
yeah, especially if he's, yeah.
So that's worth thinking about. But if you have others, if you have people positioned, you place people out there, so you always have at least some line of sight.
Yeah, you have to control it.
Except for like 3 seconds where someone else is going around.
Interesting point, and the fact, I don't know if he's in the national park or not. He's going on those arcs, I think he's not, right? That guy's outside.
He's outside, yeah.
Good question. And that's why I bring up that's why we had this whole discussion about Part 107, is if you start just flying for the heck of it and just getting stuff, that could happen to you. You might have your information no longer value. So, I don't know that.
Yeah, maybe it's cool enough.
Yeah, it's cool enough, and it just shows, that's a real skillful person who knows how to fly well. It's really amazing to me fun. And, but you're right, if he's selling, if he's a hobbyist,
Well, even
if you're a
YouTube,
hobbyist.
he gets paid, right,
Yeah,
by the
he's
number of
monetized.
views, right, then
Yeah.
it's commercial.
yeah, so if he's gone commercial, then I don't know. I don't know. Maybe there are the times the hobbyist would put it up there and also it's like, hey, also became, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's a great question. What are some things you can learn from your drones just buzzing around like this? That was for total entertainment. If you think about your stuff, your research, what do you find out? You could not find out if you didn't have that tool.
That's what I was thinking of, like how steep some of that is. You couldn't easily access some of those cliff faces and see some of the things that are there. It's like so hard to try to repel those areas.
Or, yeah, out at Air Force Base, they're talking about doing that for monitoring prairie falcon nests. You ever involved in that? They talk about actually using them to go out and monitor nest sites to see if there's chicks or eggs in them. You don't want to disturb the birds while they're there, but if you can get up around and get a shot above, you can like count them on the side. That's a concern. One time, who was with me? We were up, gosh, at the top of Spruce Mountain. We were flying. Brissacona's Birchfield. There's a prairie falcon who was chasing our drone. I'm like, oh no. And we're like, it's seriously swooping on it, come around like, it's gonna get hooked up on our propellers and they're both gonna go down. That's gonna be bad. I was freaking out. So that is a concern. We've got to watch it. I think most aren't gonna mess with it, but you know, you've seen raptors up in the air and they latch onto each other and kind of tumble. I worry about that all the time. All the time. We wanted to see one time if there was viable sites clear up on top of the mountain and over. So instead of spending all day hiking up there to get to it, we buzzed up there, took the drone, flew right down where we wanted to go see what was up there. We knew that place was not suitable. We're like, this is not going to work. Let's go. Got in the car and drove the next site, and it took us all about 10 minutes. It would have taken us all day. Just, there's different applications. But that's just a fun video. And actually, Ryan back there, Hal, he's the one who turned me on that little video. It's so awesome. Thank you, Ryan, for that. You guys wanted to look at Learning Suite to find out when exams are going to happen. Is that true? I learned at least one of you thought that. Let me pull this up real quick. Do you remember what the exam is going to be like in here?
No.
I'll tell you. I will tell you right now. Let me pull this.
How much food do we have to bring you to DNA?
Burritos again?
Burritos.
Burritos.
Are you gonna be okay?
Homemade cookies, homemade pie.
Yeah, well, we gotta bring it. Bring some cone pie with shaved cake.
Okay, I made the boo with something. What we're going to do here. Oh, it's right there. It's right here. I'm going to give you a take-home exam.
Oh.
So that's the day right here. It's right. I should have made a different color so it stood out. So that is October 8th. Today is the 1st. So on the 8th, I'm going to give you a take-home exam and I hand you a piece of paper that has probably 5 questions on it. And what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to go and spend a week, as much time as you need in a week to get after this thing. So, in my mind, ideally you have a page of stuff, including maybe some references and things that you've learned about that subject. You've gone into it as if I were to give you a take-home exam. At the end of the semester, I'm going to give you 2 midterms that are going to be like that. So, 5 questions. You take them and go after it and give me back a page or a page and a half, whatever you feel like you need to answer those 5 questions. That will be your exam. Number 1 on the 8th. Was that sufficient information? Okay. Anything else you want to say about that? Okay.
Will you turn it on Learning Suite, or do you want us to bring in the questions?
The question was brought up on Learning Suite, or bring it to me. Let's just do Learning Suite. You know, Learning Suite is so easy to submit stuff. So let's do Learning Suite. Okay. On to the next thing. You did last time some image classification in this class last Thursday, correct? And I heard it was a love-hate relationship. Most of you loved it. Some were like, this was ridiculous. You probably didn't say that. But part of this is just making sure you know what it is and you know how to run it. So here you have this chance of taking drone imagery. I mean, all the stuff is just being collected just like we've been doing in class here. And then you ran this analysis on it. And let me launch it so it doesn't say click here. If I hit this, we can look at some of the slides. Now I feel better. If I were to ask you the difference, what would you say? I know you know this, but unsupervised classification, what is that? Compared to a supervised, who wants to take a stab at the difference between those 2 things? Hi.
Unsupervised is basically like where like the computer does it all and you kind of just like give it some parameters. And then supervised is when you actually do it yourself by like making trainings and stuff.
Okay. So unsupervised, we let the computer do a lot of the assessment. So what is it looking for? What is a computer looking for when it's doing an unsupervised classification? That's a key moment in time to think that through. What is it looking for specifically?
Spectral theory.
So spectral values, yeah. Who said something?
He said patterns.
Looking for spectral patterns. What are these spectral patterns?
Like the groups of pixels and like how they're grouped together and how similar they are to each other.
Okay, so how similar they are and whether they're grouped together. And actually, if you do a supervised and unsupervised classification, groupings, we can talk about groupings. And later we'll talk about OBIA. That's called object-based image analysis. And we'll talk more about this when we get to e-cognition. But when you think about this one, every pixel is its own value. So they tend to be grouped together because usually you have similar values that are together, right? But sometimes they're not grouped together, and you might get a bunch that are just over here. And sometimes that's cool, sometimes that's not cool. Because you might want to say, oh yeah, I'm finding all these little flowers or something I'm picking out. But it turns out that it also might be that those are not being classified correctly. And it creates what's called a salt and pepper effect. Salt and pepper means you've got these little isolated pixels that don't mean anything. And so often after you're done doing a classification, you would want to run a clump and a sieve. You clump everything that is like 5 pixels and less into a grouping, and then you sieve them away, which means you get rid of the salt and pepper effect by doing it. Assuming that clumps that small aren't meaningful. If they're meaningful, you might be losing data, you might be losing information when you do that. So what is that? What is it? And we'll talk more about remote sensing. We talk later about remote sensing characteristics. We'll discuss that. But what is this value in this image that you are having the computer pull out? What is it?
Classification. So it's a representation of the real world.
It is a representation of the real world. You hope it's a representation of the real world. Exactly. a brightness value. These are reflectance values that are usually associated with like bands and wavelengths of light. So the individual just reflectance, it gets reported as a digital number at the end. And that has to do with what that reflectance is like. So if I were reflecting heavy in certain wavelengths, it's going to pick those values up in certain wavelengths of light, such as blue, right? I might have a whole bunch of reflecting really strong in the blue, and others not. Or the red, or the green, or the infrared, or whatever. So you're trying to pick up that variability based on those reflectance patterns. And again, we'll talk about this in remote sensing discussion. But still for now, an unsupervised classification is looking at these reflectance values and it's saying, okay, everything that seems to be falling within this group of values, digital numbers, seems to be, well, I would consider a class. And it says this is class 1. Well, these are all pretty similar. Those will go into class 2. And how many classes is it going to do? Here's class 3. No. There's class 4. How many will it make? Whatever you tell it to make. And most people who do this for a living, there's a guy who's a top-notch remote sensor. Top-notch. He says, I never do supervised classifications. And I'm the other way around. I'm like, I love supervised. I feel like that's what I can train the computer to do what I want to do. He's like, I never do that. He only does unsupervised. He'll create like 200 or 300 classes. And then he goes and looks at all those pixels and then compares it to the image behind it and says, yep, all these pixels are all falling into water. Assign that to water. Next group of 28 pixels, still water. Assign to water. The next 64, still water. And he'll do that class after class. And right there, oh, there's a breaking point. Those are not water. Those are Pinus longeva. We're moving over. I'm doing this. Pylo. Next step, pylo. Pylo. And he does that for 200 to 300 of these little clusterings that were created by the computer. He did not tell the computer what those were. He went back and looked at the pixels that had been clustered together in an unsupervised fashion. So that unsupervised classification is a form of pixel. Am I making sense with that whole little conversation? And you did this, yeah, I'm sure you kind of get it already, but that's what happened. It is a form of pixel-based classification and is essentially computer automated. The user specifies the number of classes and the spectral classes are created solely based on the numerical information in the data. The pixel values for each of the bands or indices, the bands of wavelengths of light. It's all about reflectance of light. Clustering algorithms are used to determine the natural statistical grouping of the data. The pixels are grouped together into what? Based on their spectral similarity, or grouped together based on their spectral similarity. The computer uses feature space to analyze and group the data into classes. And so if I didn't have these rings up here, I'd have a whole bunch of little dots. And then you'd say, okay, well these dots all seem to be grouped together, so that's got to be something here on band X and band Y, looking at different wavelengths of light, different bands, and see how they sort out. You got your 10 classes you assigned it to. If you put 100 classes, well, that right there might be grouped in one here, and that'd be grouped in one, and these 3 maybe, and that one, and these 3, and those 3, and these 3, and those 5. That's probably what happened based on the number of groups you tell it to create. But when you go back through it, you're still going to say, yeah, all 5 of these groups is created here. They all belong to the same feature. And you classify them together.
So why would that guy, is it just a personal preference of why he would do unsupervised and assign them all?
I wondered. But this guy, he is heavily published. He's been doing this work for so long. I'm just like, I better take a little more thought into this, because I've always sort of swept it under the rug as, it's that other method. I don't do that. Usually people do that method just to explore data. Like, let's get a feel for how many classes are naturally out there, just to get a sense for it. Maybe we'll base the number of things we categorize according to the groupings you would see in an unsupervised classification. I've seen that done a lot. But to really make that your device, the thing you go after, so he got me thinking a lot about it. And I get it. I get why he would do that. It makes sense to me. Because you really are able to pinpoint just a few pixels together that you feel like that really fits tight. Whereas when you do a supervised, I'll ask you in a second what that is, you think about how accurate you are in picking out your pixels versus the computer picking out
It
pixels.
feels like he's just making them supervised, like kind of a supervised.
That makes sense to me, you just said. It's so similar in the way you're doing it. It's just that you're letting the computer generate the similarities, you're not doing it yourself. That's a great point.
I think that might be only really appropriate for your type of distinction classes. They point out like that's broken down. Like if you're looking for separating different types of vegetation, your color green, right? What the computer is going to say is different. It's going to be completely intermixed, right?
Yep.
Sage versus, you know, maybe small sagebrush or big sagebrush or whatever. You know, if you're looking for things like that. There's no way that's going to help you at all, right? You're going to have to.
That's another great point. So you think about what your question is, and look at your kind of data you're working with, and that may really dictate. If you've got some real distinct classes, here's water, this is vegetation, right? Here is bare soils. You might find that to work great at pulling across that detail. If there's a like grading that you want to be able to separate out, a little fuzzy, you might create a whole bunch of classes that do that, but the reality is that this might work just fine for that. The stuff I've done, I'll show you what we did. So we actually tested this ourselves, and I'll show you that next. What is a supervised classification? You guys know what that is? What is a supervised classification compared to unsupervised?
Train the computer.
You train it, you are training it. How do you train it?
You assign the class.
And you did this, right? You did this on Thursday. You are assigned, you are building what's called a feature class or a signature file with using areas of interest. You are digitizing around something you know is what you want to classify into a certain class type. If it's, what would be an example, you're going to digitize around something. And you're going to say everything that has that set of pixel features, that belongs to this class. What might that be? Like in your lab. Water is an easy one, right? Obvious, water. You gotta get after water. And does water get confused with anything in an image? Unfortunately, it gets confused with stuff. So you gotta be careful on water because it gets confused. What else is out there and what could be confused with? But what else is there? Sometimes it might be conifers versus aspen. I can pick those out really quick. So I digitize around aspen foliage. And I do it once on this tree, then I go to this tree and do it again, and I do this tree up here, and I do this tree over here, and down here in the bottom of this, in the image, here's your image, I'm doing one here, here, and here. Why am I doing 20 or 30 polygons around aspen? Why not just one and call it good? There's a high amount of variability. You want to capture that variability because you have pixels you're not capturing in aspen. And it is aspen, but you didn't capture it and it's on the fringe of maybe being something else. You'll find out what happens when you're done. All of a sudden you're going to have a whole bunch of confusion in your aspen canopy. It's going to be pixels that got assigned to something else because you didn't capture it.
The training sites in ArcFlow, is it formed at all by the shape that you use? I'm just curious because, like, for example, if you have aspen canopy, can you just make a box,
Yeah.
right? And say that's your training site,
Yes.
or do you need to go around outside and does it make a difference?
Typically I'll use a polygon tool. You can use a box too because you're capturing pixels and it's assigning all the pixels that you capture into the algorithm that separates them into distinct classes. Unlike an object-based image analysis, it's not looking at juxtaposition to anything else around it. It's every cell has its own value. So every cell is going to be assigned to something, regardless of who's around it. So the shape that you create for identifying it, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. So you want to capture that variability, so you do a whole bunch to make sure you've captured everything that's possibly aspen, everything that's conifer. If it's bare ground, if it's litter, if it's snow, whatever, you got to capture it. And the one that people often don't do, that you really need to do, is shadow. Because shadow, if you don't do it, it gets thrown out there as something else, and it's just going to add confusion to your data. You've got, if you have shadow, which you're going to have in a remote sensed image, you better capture it because it will create confusion later.
Like capture it its own class,
Yes.
shadow, or capture it as like this is aspen, it's in shadow versus.
If you think that there's a slight variation in aspen shadow versus conifer shadow versus something else, you might want to do that, create different shadow classes, which you can, right? Just digitize around and just label it as shadow. But most of the time we just do a shadow class. So supervised classification, the user or image analyst supervises the pixel classification process. The user specifies the various pixel values or spectral signatures that should be associated with each class. This is done by selecting representative sample sites of a known cover type called training sites or areas. The computer algorithm then uses the spectral signatures from these training areas to classify the whole image. So whatever you've gone out and identified, it then takes your range of values, says, okay, across this. Now, you just identified 812 pixels into certain classes. We will now classify all 243,000 based on whatever you assigned within your 800 pixels. And that's why you probably should do more than 800 pixels. You might do a couple thousand pixels, maybe 10,000 pixels. And let it know what those characteristics ought to be like, and then it'll produce the final output for you. Within that, it has to decide which ones are going to be which. These are some typical ones. You've got maximum likelihood, minimum distance, Bahalo and Opus distance, and spectral angle mapper. These are all different ways of classifying using a supervised classification technique. And here's one. This is U, which stands for, here's sand, that's corn, that's hay, that's F, this is water, that's U. I forget what they stand for. I knew those one day. This image was probably produced 20 years ago, but I still like it a ton. This is what it's showing you, that they're not seeing the dots, but if I put a point right there, right here, and if I use a minimum distance method for determining what that class would be, what would it be? Minimum distance to like the center of the masses here. Like that right there, what would that be classified if it's out here? It'd be as corn. But if I had a point right here, and it's going minimum distance to like the median, the middle of it, it'd go right here, it'd be corn. And this right here, this right here would be, right there, would be sand. It's going to miscalculate it. And so what happens is you use this right here as a maximum likelihood. It's actually, I'm sorry about the spelling. It's actually looking for, and it runs an equation on it. It's looking for probability. So instead of just a distance, it's looking for a probability of where does that actually belong based on everything else that's around it. You've got this concentration of U's over here, and there's really no sand in here. It's going to say, based on statistical likelihood, that's a U. That's a U. What the heck is U? That's how this thing operates. And so it does a really nice job. It does a really good job, but it's not perfect. Because if you go in right there, it still could be U, but boink, it's gone to sand. And you've misidentified. And later we'll talk about how you quantify this so it tells people how good your maps are. Because that's what you'd want to do. I got 60 seconds. I'm going to show you the rest. I need to show you this. I'll start, and I'm going to stop to let you go to your next thing. But I'll get started. We did willow. We said, okay, here's a riparian system. It's got all these willow species. We want to know what these willow are. We think we can classify them to the species level. And separate that from bare ground if we want to, or grass, to assess different, and we compare different image processing techniques. And I did this in a class. I tell you about a paper I did in a class. This was for my PhD, and then we published this. Like right after we were done with class, we published this. So this is it. Compare the classification of color in infrared images. So large scale aerial photographs. Large scale being what? What does that mean? High resolution, low extent is large scale. Not a large area, it's the other way around. So small scale would be a very large area with coarse resolution. Large number of pixels leads to image problems. I'll show you in a second. This is a 1 in 2400 scale. Individual willows range from 1 to 10,000 pixels in the canopy. So let me show you a picture. I need to come back to this. There's enough stuff here. So here is a canopy right there of a willow. That's a Geyer's willow right there. That had 3,000 pixels in it from the image I had taken, because our pixels were like 7 centimeter size resolution. And so we said that could be a problem. We've got so many pixels in this image. How do you deal with that? That's for Wednesday. So, not Wednesday, it's for Thursday. So Thursday, I'm going to finish telling you the story about this because I hate to not tell you a few things about it. And then we'll talk a little bit about quantifying these patterns, these patches in our lab. You're going to learn frag stats. You're going to learn what values mean. When you are going to quantify something like that, here's your willow. I would classify that willow, then I could run it through an analysis and say, well, what do I know about that area? Well, is it round or is it not round? How big is that? How many others are around it that are like that? That is what frag stats does. It analyzes patterns across the landscape and gives you quantitative values for that. That's a Thursday lab exercise. A lot of words. I ran out. Anything else you want to say before we depart? Thank you all for coming. Appreciate you being here. How are labs going? You feel like you're getting something useful, meaningful out of them? Some take-home stuff you can use? Awesome. Okay, see you guys later. What was the thing?